The hum of machinery vibrated through Kai's teeth. His eyes darted across the console before him, the myriad lights blinking in a disconcerting symphony. Rhiannon, can you lock onto their signal again? It's fluctuating. Across the cramped cockpit, Rhiannon shifted, her fingers tracing patterns on the holographic interface projected above her knees. A furrow etched itself between her brows as she focused. I'm trying, Kai. It feels like they're intentionally masking their presence. Their energy signature is fractured. He squeezed his eyes shut, remembering the chilling feeling of the entity's touch from only a few days ago. Its power had coursed through him, leaving an echo of raw energy in its wake. An awakening he was still struggling to understand. Fractured, he repeated, tasting the word on his tongue. Is that even possible? Rhiannon let out a frustrated sigh. There has to be a reason. Why else would they go through all this trouble? She swiped at a data point, her face illuminated by the stark blue light. Kai, look. On the main console, a new image flickered to life, a chaotic cluster of overlapping energy signatures, each pulsing with an unsettling intensity. That's them? But it looks like disjointed pieces, Kai said, his brow furrowing in confusion. Rhiannon nodded grimly. It feels like they're fragmented somehow, as if they are being reconstructed. Kai felt a chill crawl down his spine. Reconstruction wasn't natural. It was artificial, calculated, and terrifyingly powerful. If they can rebuild themselves, what else can they do? A tremor shook their ship as a warning siren blared through the cockpit. A jarring holographic alert flashed above Rhiannon. Incoming energy flux. Kai, they are broadcasting something directly at us, Rhiannon screamed, her voice cracking with urgency. His heart pounded in his chest. This wasn't just a passive signal anymore. Something was coming. Kai gripped the control levers, adrenaline flooding his system. He needed to act fast. Prepare for evasive maneuvers, he shouted over the alarm. Divert all power to deflectors. The ship lurched violently as the energy flux struck them, a searing wave that sent shards of glass flying and plunged the cockpit into darkness. Kai gasped for breath, his vision blurring. The smell of ozone filled his nostrils. Rhiannon lay slumped in her seat, unconscious. Rhiannon, he yelled, frantically checking for any signs of life. Silence met his desperate call. But then, a faint flicker of bioluminescence pulsed from beneath Rhiannon's arm. He breathed a sigh of relief, the tension slowly draining out of his tense body. She was alive. Just as Kai reached out to her, a chilling crackle echoed through the cockpit, accompanied by an unearthly voice that seemed to reverberate within their very bones. Greetings, it said, laced with static and a chilling calm. Convergence Protocol 0 has begun. Rhiannon, Kai called, his heart pounding against the steel hull of their ship, a frantic drum solo in the echoing silence of the damaged cockpit. The bioluminescent glow beneath Rhiannon's arm intensified, a beacon of hope battling a growing fear that was cold and unwelcome. Light flickered back on the console panel as it sputtered back to life. She groaned, her eyes fluttering open. Her vision swam with discolored static, each blink a struggle against fatigue. What happened? Rhiannon croaked, her voice strained. Kai let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding, offering a shaky smile. We took a hit, hard. He pressed his hands to the control panel, overriding the malfunctioning systems with brutal efficiency. That energy flux, it slammed right into us. Rhiannon blinked again, focusing on him through the hazy remnants of disorientation. Her brow furrowed as she took stock of their surroundings. Ripped cords, shattered screens, and the lingering acrid tang of ozone filling the cramped cockpit. She looked at Kai, her gaze piercing despite the fatigue that clouded it. Those readings, what were they? He hesitated, a wave of unease washing over him. It wasn't just fear, it was something deeper, laced with a chilling sense of wrongness he couldn't quite put his finger on. Fractured, he muttered, remembering the chaos on the screen before the attack. Deliberately fragmented. Rhiannon's hand instinctively flew to her communicator, but Kai stopped her. He shook his head, the motion sharp and decisive. Static, he said grimly. They cut off communication. A sudden crackle reverberated through the ship, this time a tangible tremor in the very metal beneath their skin. Rhiannon's eyes widened as she realized the source of the sound was not from outside, but within. What are they doing? Her voice barely a whisper, laced with fear. Kai gripped her arm tightly, his own unease mounting. They both listened intently, bracing themselves for whatever was coming next. Something isn't right. He looked at Rhiannon, his words tight and urgent. Whatever they had planned, it's changing. We need to get out of here. Kai wrestled with the controls, his knuckles white, sweat stinging his eyes. The ship lurched again, a violent tremor that threatened to send them hurtling through the void. Rhiannon, can you get us out of this? Engines are at critical overload, Rhiannon gasped, her voice strained as she fought against the disorientation. Her bioluminescent glow pulsed erratically, mirroring the volatile energy coursing through their vessel. They're jamming our navigation systems. We're blind. Fear clawed at Kai's throat, cold and sharp. They were caught in a maelstrom of unknown forces, adrift in a sea of stars. The chilling words of that unearthly voice echoed in his mind. Convergence Protocol Zero has begun. What did it mean? We need to shake them off, he demanded, his voice laced with desperation. Rhiannon, anything. She slammed her hand down on a console, activating an old experimental propulsion system. The ship shuddered, groaning under the strain of its unorthodox maneuver. A series of violent tremors shook their vessel, but slowly, agonizingly slowly, they began to shift course. It's working, Rhiannon whispered, exhaustion battling with a surge of relief. But it's straining everything. Her words were cut short by another blast, even more ferocious than before. The ship convulsed violently, alarms screaming in protest. Light flickered erratically around the cockpit, casting grotesque shadows on their faces. Kai struggled to maintain control, every nerve ending vibrating with the sheer terror of it all. He could feel Rhiannon next to him, her body taut with fear, her bioluminescence fading as her energy reserves dwindled. His grip tightened on the levers. They had to survive this wave, however long it might take. Suddenly, as quickly as it began, the onslaught stopped. The ship groaned and settled, the alarms finally fading into a dissonant hum. Silence fell upon the cockpit, heavy and thick with the weight of the near miss. Kai looked at Rhiannon, his heart pounding in his chest. She was pale, her breathing shallow, but she was alive. We made it, he breathed out, more to himself than to her. But the faint tremor of unease lingered under his skin. They had escaped one attack, but something told him this was only the beginning. This wasn't a random assault, Rhiannon said finally, her voice hoarse. They're targeting us, for a reason. Her words pierced through Kai's fog of relief, dragging him back into the chilling reality of their situation. They were not just lost in space anymore. They were hunted. Rhiannon shifted against her harness, every muscle taut despite the relief that coursed through her. A dull ache throbbed behind her eyes, a remnant of the energy flux's assault. Kai, she rasped, her voice strained. What did those readings mean? It felt like watching a shattered mirror. Kai swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on the flickering navigation screen. Static blanketed their comms, rendering their escape route through deep space a labyrinth of blind alleys. Deliberately fragmented, he muttered, recalling the jumbled energy signatures. Like they were trying to hold something together, or hide something. A surge of static crackled through his comm, briefly silencing the hum of the auxiliary engines. A new voice, cold and metallic, filled the cockpit. Your intrusion has been noted, it boomed, each word a precise calculation. Resistance will be futile. Kai's hand flew to the weapon console, but Rhiannon grabbed his wrist, her grip unyielding. Don't, she hissed. They know we're here. They want to provoke us. He felt a chill snaking down his spine despite the heat of his rage. This wasn't just about avoiding detection anymore. It was about understanding their enemy. Who were they? Why were they targeting them? What do you suggest? The words felt hollow even to him. Rhiannon's gaze met his, unwavering and calm amidst the chaos. We need a different signal, she said, tapping at her panel with increasing urgency. Something that speaks their language. Kai watched as she hacked through encrypted protocols, her bioluminescence flashing in sync with the rhythmic bursts of code streaming across the screen. It felt like watching a warrior battling unseen forces, using logic and cunning instead of steel and fire. They're building something, Rhiannon muttered, finally breaking away from her work. Her eyes widened with understanding. Using our fragments, our energy, to power it. Her words hung heavy in the silence, leaving Kai reeling. What was this something? What did they have against them that warranted such a brutal attack? He needed answers, and he needed them now, before this new threat reached full activation. The fate of their mission, perhaps even the universe, might hinge on unraveling their enemy's code. But first, they had to survive another night in the cold void, hunted by forces beyond their comprehension. They were outmatched, outnumbered, but not yet defeated. We need to decipher their signals, Rhiannon urged. They're broadcasting a chaotic symphony of energy. If we can understand the structure. Her gaze drifted to the fractured energy patterns hovering on the navigation screen. Kai felt a growing sense of unease, watching her focused expression. Even at her best, she pushed herself almost to breaking point. He knew pushing her further, risking another overload, could backfire disastrously. Rhiannon, he began hesitantly, his voice caught between concern and frustration. You're already stretched thin. Maybe we should. No time, she interrupted, a defiant spark in her eyes. They've disrupted our comms. Every moment buys them precious resources. Every fragmented pulse could be a building block. He sighed inwardly. Her determination was both a strength and a dangerous flaw. He knew arguing wouldn't change anything, so he took a deep breath and reached for his own console. Give me everything you can salvage from their broadcast. I'll run it through the decryption matrix. We may not have their language, but we can at least analyze their patterns. As Rhiannon tapped frantically at her panel, sending raw energy data to his system, Kai felt a familiar pressure building in his head. The matrix demanded immense processing power. Every calculation drained him physically. He tried to focus on the codes swirling before him, seeking any hint of order amidst the chaotic mess. Hours blurred into minutes as they worked in tandem, their shared purpose pushing them forward. Then a breakthrough. A faint pattern emerged from the digital noise, shimmering like heat haze across the console screen. Kai's heart pounded with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Look, he breathed. Rhiannon's eyes widened as she leaned closer, her fingers hovering over the controls. It's repeating, but it's not random. She traced a finger along the flickering patterns on the screen, like a series of commands. Kai felt the weight of understanding settle upon them. They weren't just dealing with an attack, they were being targeted by a complex, sentient force. A force capable of learning, adapting, and ultimately controlling them if they failed to decipher its intentions. What do they want? He asked the question aloud, his voice barely above a whisper. Rhiannon shook her head, her face grim. That's what we need to find out. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken anxieties. They had just stared into the abyss of an unknown enemy and lived to tell the tale, but they knew this was only the beginning. The universe held secrets far darker than they ever imagined, and now, it seemed, those secrets were coming for them. Rhiannon's eyes flickered across the navigation display, her brow furrowed in concentration. Kai, what are we looking at? She asked, her voice tinged with a mixture of awe and apprehension. This is beyond anything I've ever encountered. It's like their language, Kai replied, his gaze glued to the shimmering patterns swirling on his console screen. A complex series of energy pulses, each one carrying a specific message. He rubbed his eyes, exhausted but unwilling to break his focus. But it's not binary or anything I recognize. It's almost sentient. Rhiannon leaned closer, tracing her finger along the pulsing lines on his display. Look at those fluctuations, she murmured, pointing to a section where the energy levels spiked and dipped erratically. They're mimicking the neural patterns of a living organism, Kai. But I've never seen anything like it. He nodded, feeling a chill crawl down his spine despite the warmth radiating from the console. These aren't just random bursts, he agreed. This is purposeful, calculated. They're trying to communicate with us. An unsettling silence fell between them, broken only by the hum of the ship's systems and the frantic whirring of their processors as they both strained to decipher the alien code. The weight of that silent conversation, of having been discovered and targeted by a force beyond their comprehension, hung heavy in the cockpit. What do we do? Rhiannon asked finally, her voice quieter than usual, betraying the tremor of fear she tried to mask. Kai straightened his shoulders, steeling himself for whatever answer lay hidden within the cryptic signals flooding their scanners. Decipher it. Understand what they want, he said with determination. Only then can we hope to survive this. The urgency of their task filled them both with renewed purpose. They worked tirelessly, pushing their minds and bodies to their limits as they delved deeper into the heart of the alien message. Every crack in the code felt like a step closer to understanding. Every decoded pulse brought them closer to unraveling their enemy's intentions. As the hours ticked by, a pattern emerged from the chaotic storm of data. It wasn't language, not in any conventional sense, but it was a structure, a logic behind the chaotic energy signatures. Rhiannon looked up at Kai, her eyes glowing with the reflected light of her console, a spark of triumph battling against the fatigue that weighed on them both. "I think I'm getting something," she said, her voice hoarse from overuse. Kai leaned closer, his breath catching as he saw the symbols forming on Rhiannon's screen. They were complex geometric patterns, pulsing with an eerie energy that seemed to vibrate in sync with the ship's systems. "What is it?" "It's a map," Rhiannon breathed, her finger tracing the intricate lines across her display. "But not of space. It's something else." She turned her head towards Kai, her eyes filled with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. "It's a map of energy, a network connecting multiple realities." "Multiple realities," Kai repeated, his mind struggling to grasp the implications. "But how is that possible? We thought ours was unique." Rhiannon shook her head, her brow furrowing as she continued analyzing the data streaming across her console. "Unique isn't quite the word," she countered thoughtfully. "It seems our reality is one node in a vast network of interconnected realms, like cells within a larger organism." Her fingers danced across the interface, manipulating the intricate energy map displayed on the screen. "This network has specific points of convergence," Rhiannon continued, her voice hushed with awe and concern. "Those are where dimensions interact, overlap, collide at certain frequencies." She pointed to a cluster of pulsating nodes that glowed brighter than the rest. These seemed to be hyperactive, vibrating at unusually high levels of instability. Kai's gaze fell on those pulsing nodes. A shiver ran down his spine despite the warmth emanating from the console. "And our attackers," he began, but struggled to find the words. "They're exploiting these points," Rhiannon finished grimly, her eyes flickering between the map and Kai's face, "using them to manipulate energy flows, perhaps even to tear holes between realities." She paused, letting that thought hang heavy in the air between them. "Why?" Kai pressed, his voice laced with a mixture of disbelief and fear. What could their enemies possibly gain by unraveling the fabric of reality itself? Rhiannon shook her head, her expression unreadable. "That's what we need to find out," she said finally. "It's a puzzle, Kai, but one we need to solve before this becomes a universal catastrophe." Her gaze hardened with newfound determination, mirroring the intensity of the energy map swirling before them. The stakes had just become unimaginably higher, and the clock was ticking. "Rhiannon," Kai said, his voice hushed, "those points of convergence. They're not just theoretical, they're bleeding into our reality." Rhiannon's face paled as she twisted in her chair to stare at the navigation display. Reality was no longer a static map. Shimmering anomalies flickered along their plotted course, distortions that danced with chaotic energy. "We're seeing ripples," she murmured, tracing the unpredictable paths on the screen with her finger. "Reality is fracturing." She glanced back at Kai, her eyes wide with urgency. "The signals, they're intensifying. They're trying to exploit these weak points, tear them open wider." A wave of nausea swept over Kai as he processed her words. Their enemy wasn't just trying to conquer their world, they were looking to shatter it altogether. "But why?" he asked, the question hanging heavy between them. "Power," Rhiannon muttered, her gaze fixed on the pulsing nodes. "The raw energy of the converged realities. It's irresistible to someone who wants absolute control." She turned back to Kai, her expression resolute. "We have to stop them, but we need answers. What do these energies mean? How do they work?" Kai nodded, his mind racing. They needed to understand their enemy's goals before it was too late. He ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. "Do you think we can communicate with them, with whoever is behind this attack?" Rhiannon shook her head. "Their signals are chaotic, untranslatable." She paused, tapping thoughtfully at her console. but perhaps there's a way to analyze their energy signature, to trace its source. She glanced up at Kai, hope sparking in her eyes. If we can find the origin point, maybe we can figure out who they are, what they want, maybe even how to stop them. Their task felt monumental, but a shared spark of determination ignited within them both. The fate of their reality hung precariously in the balance, and only they stood between it and utter chaos. Rhiannon's fingers danced over the console, drawing intricate diagrams as she delved deeper into the enemy's code, hoping to find a clue that would steer them towards salvation. They had no time for hesitation. Rhiannon's eyes burned with exhaustion, but a fierce light mirrored the holographic display crackling before them. She traced a complex energy pattern with one gloved finger, her brow furrowed in concentration. "The anomaly signatures are shifting," she murmured, her voice strained yet tight with purpose. "They're becoming more organized." Kai leaned closer, his breath catching as he witnessed the intricate dance of energy across the console's screen. A wave of dizzying complexity washed over him, a sense of being on the precipice of unraveling something both profound and terrifying. "Almost as if they're learning, adapting," he whispered, his gaze fixated on the rapidly changing patterns. Rhiannon nodded grimly, her finger drumming against the console in a silent staccato rhythm. "They're feeding off our actions, Kai. Every attempt we make to decipher their code, every maneuver we execute, it's fueling their intelligence." She glanced up at him, her eyes reflecting the urgency of their situation. "We need to find a way to turn the tables, break their cycle of learning before they become too powerful." Kai's mind raced, searching for a solution amidst the chaotic storm before them. Years of training had honed his strategic instincts, but nothing prepared him for this level of intricate manipulation. "Can we disrupt their signals?" he asked tentatively. "Introduce a counter-frequency that confuses their analysis?" Rhiannon's eyes lit up at his suggestion. "That could work," she said, her voice regaining some of its usual confidence. "But it requires precise targeting and an immense amount of energy output, something our systems weren't designed for." She turned away from the console, studying a complex network of wiring behind the display with narrowed eyes. There might be a way to bypass the main power regulators, drawing raw energy directly from the engine core. She paused, weighing the risks involved. "It's highly volatile, a risk to our ship and ourselves," she admitted. "But our current course of action is leading us into oblivion," Kai countered, his gaze unwavering. "We need a decisive move. I trust your calculations." Rhiannon nodded, her expression hardening with resolve. "Then let's rewrite the equation." A glint of determination flashed in her eyes. "It's time to hit back." Kai watched as Rhiannon went about her work with precision and purpose, her fingers flying across keypads like a dancer performing an intricate choreography. He felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with fear as she tapped into the very heart of their vessel, risking everything on this desperate gambit. He could only hope it would be enough to turn the tide against their unseen enemy. Kai watched Rhiannon work, her focus unwavering as she manipulated complex energy pathways with calculated precision. A sheen of sweat glistened on her brow, but the intensity in her cerulean eyes revealed a mind churning through possibilities at breakneck speed. Her gauntleted fingers danced across holographic displays, summoning intricate schematics that unfolded before him like living constellations of code. "The core's protection protocols are overloading," Rhiannon murmured, her voice strained with concentration as she fought to maintain control over the volatile system. She keyed in a series of increasingly complex commands, each one pushing the ship's infrastructure closer to its limits. "We're bypassing safeguards, Kai. This could go critical." Kai swallowed, his throat dry despite the surge of adrenaline coursing through him. Trusting Rhiannon's brilliance with every fiber of his being, he steeled himself against the mounting tension. "Just get that counter-frequency tuned," he replied, his voice tight with urgency. "Almost there," Rhiannon gasped, her face illuminated by the flickering energy patterns swirling around her workspace. She slammed one final command into the system, and the room pulsed with a sudden surge of raw power. The holographic displays flickered wildly as she wrestled for control, her knuckles white against the cold metal of her workstation. Then, just as abruptly, The chaotic oscillations subsided, replaced by a steady hum of focused energy. A wave of relief washed over Kai, quickly followed by renewed apprehension. "Did it work?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Rhiannon let out a shaky breath, wiping a trickle of sweat from her brow. A faint smile touched her lips. "I think so." She tapped a command, and the holographic displays shifted, revealing a new set of data streams, chaotic at first, but now slowly falling into rhythmic patterns. "The anomalies are reacting," she said, her voice filled with cautious triumph. "They're disoriented." Kai leaned closer, his gaze fixed on the screen as a sense of exhilaration surged through him. They were fighting back, taking control. The enemy had underestimated them, their arrogance masking vulnerabilities Rhiannon was expertly exploiting. "Rhiannon," he began, "this could—" Suddenly, the console sputtered violently, throwing holographic projections into disarray. Emergency red lights blinked frantically, overriding the normally soothing blue glow of the control panels. "It backfired," Rhiannon choked out, her eyes wide with alarm. They found a way to use our own energy against us. The core overload is accelerating." Rhiannon screamed over the intensifying hum that now vibrated through their bones. Kai leaped to his feet, adrenaline flooding his system. "We need to jettison auxiliary systems. Secondary power grid online?" Rhiannon worked frantically, her fingers blurring across the control panels as energy readings surged into the red. "It's going critical, Kai! I can't stabilize it." She slammed another command into the system just as the ship lurched violently, throwing them both against opposite bulkheads. Holographic displays flickered erratically, spitting out garbled data that offered no solutions. Fear twisted in Kai's gut, a feeling far different from the calculated risk they had taken before. This was survival. Pure, desperate survival. "Manual override. We need to bypass the core and reroute power directly to the subspace drive," he yelled, knowing full well it was a long shot. Rhiannon didn't reply, her lips moving in a silent prayer as she fought against impossible odds. Sweat beaded on his forehead, blurring the holographic display that flickered before him. Kai could hear a chorus of alarms howling, each one a death knell against the deafening din of failing machinery. He scrambled to access an auxiliary control panel, praying for a miracle. "Subspace drive operational! Engaging!" Rhiannon screamed, her voice distorted with static but filled with raw determination. A blinding light erupted from the ship's core as they were ripped through space, not by warp but by brute force. The stars outside streaked past in a chaotic blur of color and light. Kai felt his body convulse, bones strained against the unimaginable stress. This wasn't their planned escape route. It was sheer instinct, blind faith thrown at the abyss. But then, as abruptly as it had begun, the shaking ceased. The light subsided, replaced by a soft blue glow that emanated from within the console cluster. They were still adrift in uncharted space, the familiar constellations replaced by an eerie kaleidoscope of unfamiliar stars. Rhiannon slumped against her workstation, exhaustion overcoming her. "We're alive," she rasped, her voice hoarse. "For now." Kai looked at her with a mixture of relief and gratitude. They had survived their darkest hour. "Where are we?" Rhiannon shook her head, reaching for a data console that flickered back to life. "Doesn't matter yet. We need repairs, and fast." Rhiannon slumped against her workstation, exhaustion overcoming her. "We're alive," she rasped, her voice hoarse. "For now." Kai looked at her with a mixture of relief and gratitude. They had survived their darkest hour. "Where are we?" Rhiannon shook her head, reaching for a data console that flickered back to life. "Doesn't matter yet. We need repairs, and fast." She glanced up at Kai, her cerulean eyes gleaming with renewed determination. "That anomaly, it's still out there. Maybe learning how it operates can lead us to answers." Kai nodded, his brow furrowed in thought. "Answers about what happened today? About that core overload?" His gaze drifted towards the now silent control panel, where moments ago, life support readings danced precariously between green and red, and how we managed to survive a journey through whatever that was. Rhiannon's fingers flew across the console's interface, pulling up holographic displays and running diagnostic tests. "We went beyond the warp field," she said, her voice tight with wonder. "That anomaly, it manipulated those energy currents beyond anything I've ever seen. It felt directed." Her eyes narrowed in focus. "It might be some kind of weaponized space drive." Kai shivered at the thought, the residual terror of their close call lingering. A weapon. But who could possibly? He stopped short, realizing how little they knew about their adversaries. Rhiannon dismissed his thoughts with a dismissive wave of her hand. We don't have time for speculation. First priority is securing the ship and stabilizing our power grid. Her gaze hardened with focus. Then we need to figure out how to track that anomaly before it finds us again. Kai reached for his toolkit, relief washing over him at the familiar click of tools falling into place in his hand. Right, back to basics. He looked around at the flickering consoles, a small smile tugging at his lips. Sometimes, he said with a wry grin, the simplest solutions are best. Even amidst all this chaos, there's still order. Rhiannon returned his smile, the fatigue momentarily forgotten. Just don't try to fix anything too complicated, she countered. Remember what happened when you tried to rewire the energy dampeners last month? Kai laughed softly, a familiar warmth filling him despite the unsettling events of the day. Some things never change, do they? Their shared laughter echoed briefly through the dimly lit bridge before dissipating into the stark silence of space. They were wounded, battered by the forces they could barely comprehend, but not broken. They would fight for survival, for answers, for each other.